The day I signed away guardianship of my disabled brother, my mother didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stopped speaking to me. To the world, I'd committed the one unforgivable sin. I abandoned the person I was born to protect. The selfish daughter, the runaway. But to save my own children from the ghost of my childhood, I had to stop being the family's backup plan. I had to break the glass. My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm 38 years old. And the morning I sat down across from my mother and told her I was resigning, I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life refusing to know. To her, I had never really been a daughter. I had been a plan. "Please don't do this," she kept saying, faster and louder each time. "It's not what's best for him." Not once, not one time in 2 hours did she ask what was best for me. I was 18 the first time. A few months out of high school, I stood in a courtroom, took a slow breath, and told a judge that yes, I would willingly become my brother's co-guardian. My brother has profound autism, an intellectual disability, and a seizure disorder. I love him. He also spent my childhood teaching me to sit near the door. 12 years and 12 annual reports, later 12 signatures, and I never read a single one of them. I was still the standby, the backup, the imaginary future woman who would one day simply become my mother. For most of my life, I believed that was just who I was. The easy one. The one who didn't need anything. Tonight, I'm telling you the exact morning I stopped being the standby. And if you were ever the child quietly expected to hold up a whole family, tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this reaches. From the street, our house looked like all the others on the block. White siding, a maple that turned the color of a struck match every October, a flag by the door my mother put out on the right holidays. Inside the front room, there was a glass door, the kind with a single wide pane, clear and heavy, that separated the living room from the little sunroom where the good chairs were. That glass is the first thing I remember. Before I remember faces, I remember the cold, flat surface of it under my palm, and the way the whole world on the other side of it went quiet. Because in our house, the glass had a job. When my brother Danny started to come apart, someone would take my hand and move me behind it. "Go look out the window, sweetheart." I was 3, then 5, then 7, kneeling on the sunroom cushions with my cheek near the pane, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes in slow circles at the end of the driveway, while behind me, on the other side of the glass, the room I had just left filled up with a sound I learned to feel in my teeth. My brother is not the villain of this story. I need to say that early, and I need you to believe it, because everything else depends on it. Danny has profound autism and an intellectual disability, and a seizure disorder that has never once let him rest. He is verbal, but not really. He speaks in loops, the same phrases turned over and over, echoes of things heard years ago. When his body floods with something he can't name and can't push out through words, it comes out through his hands. Chairs, dishes. Once, the lamp with the blue shade. He is a prisoner of his own body, and the outbursts were never chosen. They were weather. And you don't hate the weather. You just learn to read the sky. So I learned to read it. I learned that when the TV clicked off in the middle of a show, it was starting. I learned that my father's footsteps went backward against the wall, sliding, never turning his back on the room. I learned to make myself small in the corner of the sunroom, behind the clear glass door, and to hold very still while objects flew and broke on the far side of it. There is a name now for the child who grows up like that, pressed against the glass of her own family, watching, silent, out of the way. Therapists call it glass child syndrome. I just thought it was my job. The house organized itself around Danny the way water organizes itself around a stone. Everything bent toward him. His medications lived on the counter in a plastic tray with the days of the week. His appointments filled the calendar. His moods set the temperature of every room. And I was the still water. The part of the family that made no waves, asked for nothing, needed nothing. If you had asked my mother back then, she would have told you, with real pride, that she was lucky, because she had one child who took everything and one child who took nothing at all. She meant it as a compliment. That is the quiet machinery of emotional neglect. It doesn't always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as praise for disappearing. I want to be fair to the girl I was, so let me tell you who she was before the role hardened over her like a second skin. She was loud. Once. There are photographs, a gap-toothed kid mid-laugh, arms thrown wide. She loved to be looked at. She used to stand on the coffee table and sing. And then, somewhere in there, she figured out that the family had exactly enough attention for one emergency, and she was not it. And she folded that loud girl up small and put her away behind the glass where she wouldn't cost anyone anything. By the time I was in the 3rd grade, I was bringing home report cards, like offerings. All A's. Gold stars. A spelling bee ribbon I taped to the refrigerator myself because I already knew no one else would. I became gifted, the way some kids become invisible, as a survival strategy, a way to be worth something in a house that had already spent its worry. Gifted child syndrome, they call that. A child performing excellence into a silence that never answers back. The clearest thing I own from that whole childhood happened the summer I was 10. Danny had a bad afternoon. It doesn't matter what started it, nothing did. Afterward, he was wrung out the way he always was, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, breathing in that heavy, dragging way, staring at nothing. The room had been cleared. My mother was on the phone with someone about something. My father had gone out to the garage to be somewhere else. And I was in the sunroom, on the other side of the glass door, holding my own left arm against my chest, because in the middle of it, a hard plastic something had caught me across the forearm and split the skin, and it was bleeding a thin, bright line down to my wrist. Nobody came. That is the part I need you to hear. Not the arms heal. Nobody came. The whole house was still bent toward the emergency, and the emergency had passed, and there was no one left over for the small, quiet one bleeding behind the glass. I ran my own arm under the cold tap in the sunroom bathroom. I pressed a wad of toilet paper against it. I was 10, and I was already very good at taking care of the person no one else remembered. And then, through the gap, under the glass door, something moved. It was the arm of my doll, the plastic one that had been thrown across the room in the worst of it. Danny had crawled to the door. He couldn't look at me. His eyes slid off to the side the way they always did, and his mouth was going quiet and fast, some phrase from a cartoon we'd watched 100 times. But he pushed that little plastic arm across the floor, through the gap until it touched my foot. And then he pushed himself backward, away, still not looking, still murmuring. I knew what it was. It was the only word for sorry that his body would ever let him make. My brother was reaching through the 1 inch of open air under a glass door to tell me he hadn't meant it. And on the other side of that same door, the grown-ups who were supposed to see both of us saw neither. I picked up the doll's arm. I put it in my pocket. My own arm had already stopped bleeding. And I understood, in the wordless way a 10-year-old understands things she won't have language for until she's 35, that this was the shape of my whole life. I would always be the one on the far side of the glass, close enough to see everything, too far away for anyone to reach. That was the wound. Not a bruise, not a scene. Just a clear pane of glass and a little girl behind it, learning that being loved in this house meant costing no one anything at all. Here is what nobody tells you about a role you're handed as a child. You don't put it down when you grow up. You carry it out the front door and into your own life, and you set it up in your own house, and you don't even notice you're doing it. By 38, I had done everything right. A husband, Ben, who is kind in the steady, unglamorous way that took me years to trust. 4 children. A house with its own maple tree. A full-time career I'm good at. From the street, my life looks like all the others on the block. And still, every single morning, I woke to a role I'd been assigned before I could read: the standby. 240 miles between my house and Danny's group home, and I could feel the thread of it pulling taut across every one of them. My body knew things my mind wouldn't admit. In any room, I entered a restaurant, a meeting, a friend's kitchen. I found the exit first, without deciding to, and I sat where I could see it. I apologized before anyone accused me of anything. The "I'm sorry" was already forming in my mouth before I knew what for. When my phone lit up, my stomach dropped a half second before my brain caught up, because for 30 years a lit-up phone had meant something had gone wrong with Danny, and I was needed. This is what a childhood spent reading the sky does to a nervous system. It never fully lets you land. I know the clinical words for it now: hypervigilance, the fawning trauma response, high-functioning anxiety worn so smoothly that people call it being reliable. Back then, I just thought that was the texture of being alive. I was so busy keeping my own head above water that I was drowning in ways I refused to count. My wisdom tooth had been throbbing for 6 months. 6 months. I run a household of 6 people and a career, and I could not find 2 hours to sit in a dentist chair for myself, because 2 hours for myself was a category of thing that did not exist. I would catch my own reflection in the dark glass of the microwave or the car window at a red light, a tired woman holding her jaw, and for a second, I wouldn't recognize her. There I was again, on the far side of the glass, watching my own life happen to someone who looked like me. And I kept being the good sister. Oh, I was so good. For years, I volunteered at autism organizations, gave up my Saturdays, learned the language, showed up. I drove the long drive to visit Danny in whatever group home he was in that year, always with my mother, always smiling. And every single year, a thick document arrived, the annual guardianship report the court required. And every single year, I signed it and sent it back without reading it, because reading it would have meant admitting it was real. 12 of them. 12 signatures. That was the shape of my overgiving. Not a grand sacrifice, but a slow leak. A decade of saying yes with a pen while my whole body was saying no. My mother told everyone. That was the part that lived under my skin. At family gatherings, at her conferences, to strangers in waiting rooms, she would put her hand on my shoulder and say it like a blessing. And Claire is going to take care of him when I'm gone. I would feel every eye in the room turn to me, warm and admiring, and I would smile and say nothing. I bit my tongue so many times, I'm surprised there's anything left of it. What kind of monster corrects that? What kind of daughter says out loud in front of everyone, "No, actually, I won't," times about her own disabled brother? So I didn't. The special needs sibling guilt is a specific kind of trap. The more impossible the ask, the more unspeakable it is to refuse, because refusing feels like refusing him. And I never wanted to refuse him. I wanted to refuse the machine. But no one had ever taught me those were 2 different things. Somewhere in those years, I did what people like me do at 2 a.m. I typed my family into a search bar. I read forums. I collected words like a kid collecting stones, parentification trauma, the enabler parent, covert narcissism, toxic family dynamics, and I tried each one on to see if it fit. Some of them almost did. I had been parentified. That was true. A child made responsible for an adult's burden long before she could carry it. But some words didn't quite fit either. I wasn't exactly the scapegoat sibling. No one blamed me for the family's pain. No one made me the villain. They simply forgot I was in the room, which is its own quieter kind of erasing. And the darker words slid right off entirely. My mother wasn't a covert narcissist. She wasn't cruel. She hadn't looked away out of weakness or performed her love for an audience. That was the confusing part, the part that kept me up. There was no villain here to point at, and a wound with no villain is the hardest kind to prove you have. Because here's the truth about my mother, and I'll give it to you plainly. She is an extraordinary woman. When the systems that were supposed to help my brother failed, she didn't collapse. She went to war. She taught herself the law. She learned the health policy, the funding streams, the acronyms, the whole labyrinth, until she knew more than most of the professionals sitting across the table from her. She built her entire career out of my brother's needs, became an expert. Other families called for help. She stood in line at food banks in her late 60s. She moved mountains, and I mean actual mountains, to get him his own home and his own staff, and the best care that someone with needs as high as his could hope for. Everything I am able to say about my brother being safe, I can say because of her. I visited home once, a few years ago, and let myself in, and found her asleep at the dining room table. Her head was down on a mountain of medical files. She was wearing a promotional t-shirt from some charity walk 20 years gone, the collar frayed to threads, sliding off one hunched shoulder. Her hands, swollen and knotted with arthritis now, were still resting flat on my brother's care plan, 60 pages of it, as if she'd fallen asleep mid-sentence in the middle of holding his whole life together. She is almost 70. She has her own health problems. And she was still, in her sleep, pressing down on the paper as though it might blow away. My mother is not cruel. My mother is drowning. And a person thrashing to keep her own head above the water genuinely cannot see the daughter going under right beside her. That is not an excuse. It is just the truest thing I know about her. This is what generational trauma actually looks like from the inside, not a monster, but a woman doing heroic things inside a system that was built to grind everyone in it to dust, passing the weight to the next set of hands because no one ever caught it for her either. Caregiver burnout is a clinical phrase. What I saw at that table was a person who had been on fire so long she'd forgotten she was burning. It was Ben who said the thing I couldn't unhear. We'd been at a party, someone's backyard, string lights, nothing, and on the drive home he was quiet for a while and then he said, not unkindly, "You check the exits in every room, you know, even in our own house. I watched you do it tonight at the Merrick's. You found the door before you found the food." He wasn't diagnosing me. He didn't have the words for the shape of it, and he didn't try to find them. He just knew something was off the way. You know, a note is off before you can name it. "I hate that you don't feel it happen," he said. Then he put his eyes back on the road, and I looked out my window at the dark, at my own reflection floating over the guardrail lights, and I had nowhere to put what he'd handed me. Let me stop for just 1 second and say this to you, directly. If you were the easy one, the child who never made trouble, who learned to want less so there'd be enough, the not needing was never a personality. It was survival. Nobody hands the invisible child a wound she can show a doctor, so she grows up doubting she has one at all. You did. It was real. Then the email came, and the whole quiet thing I'd been carrying finally cracked down the middle. It was an update to Danny's care plan. Routine, the way all of it was routine: labs, reports, the daily deluge from my mother's inbox to mine. I almost didn't read it. But I scrolled, and there, tucked into the section about his future placement, sitting there as calm as a weather forecast, was a single sentence. In the near future, he will move to a group home closer to where my sister lives, closer to where I live. There was one winter I never let myself think about, and I'll get to it. But that sentence was the first crack in the ice. Because no one had asked me. No one had told me. It had simply been decided, somewhere, at some point, that my brother would follow me for the rest of my life, that wherever I went, the machine would relocate to be near my hands, because my hands had been promised away before I ever had a say. He would be moved across the state to be closer to me, the way you move a heavy thing closer to the person who's going to have to lift it. I read that sentence 4 times, and something in me that had been holding very still since I was 7 years old finally, quietly stood up. That night I couldn't sleep. My jaw was a live wire. Around midnight I went into the bathroom so I wouldn't wake Ben, and I stood at the sink with the water running, and I made the mistake of looking up. There she was, in the mirror, the tired woman holding her swollen cheek. My own reflection, one more pane of glass with me trapped behind it. And this time I didn't look away, and I didn't not recognize her. I looked right at her, and the truth I'd buried under 12 years of signatures came up all at once and broke the surface. I cannot do this. I have never, not one single time in my entire life, wanted to be his guardian. I put my hand over my mouth and I cried without making any sound, because crying without sound was the first skill I ever learned. The door opened. My 7-year-old Nora stood there in the cold, bare feet on the freezing tile, squinting at the light. She didn't ask what was wrong. She crossed the floor and reached up with one small hand and wiped the tears off my cheek. Matter of fact, the way you'd wipe a counter. And then, in a sleepy little voice, she said, "Mommy, does your tooth still hurt? I won't ask for any toys tomorrow. You can take the money and go to the doctor. Okay? I want you to understand what that did to me." My own mother had looked at me for 38 years and seen a backup plan, a set of hands, a figurehead in waiting. And my 7-year-old looked at me in the dark for 4 seconds and saw a person in pain and tried to pay for the cure with her toy money. The child saw me. The mother never had. That was the whole thing, right there, on the bathroom tile at midnight. I got down and held her and told her my tooth was going to be fine, and I knew, the way you know the tide has turned, that I had 4 children in this house who were learning how to love from watching me, and I would not teach them that a mother is a shadow who exists to carry other people until she disappears. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house and sat down across from her at the dining room table, the one still buried under paperwork, and I told her I was resigning as my brother's guardian. She led with her own exhaustion, she always did. Before I could finish, she was off, telling me how impossible it all was, the unreliable staff, the tables she couldn't see the wood of anymore, the system that couldn't be managed. She freely admitted she was drowning. So I thought, all right, that's my door. That's actually why I wanted to talk today. I started. But wait, can I please just tell you the plan? I let her. She rushed into it, talking fast, her voice climbing. I know he needs to move to a group home, but it needs to be closer to times that makes it easier. And I'm getting him into a better agency, and the agency runs everything. And there's going to be a support broker and a lawyer who does all of it. And you won't have to, Claire. It's going to be so easy times for you. I've thought about this. I know you have 4 kids. You'll just be a figurehead, a figurehead. The wooden woman bolted to the front of the ship, facing out, mouth open, carved to look like she's leading, while the whole weight sails on behind her without her. "I need you to stop," I said. "That plan doesn't work for me. It doesn't make it easier." "Yes, it does. How does him moving closer to me make it easier?" And then I said the thing I had come to say. I kept my voice low and level, the way you do when you've rehearsed something for 30 years without knowing it. I told her I was not able to be his guardian. Not now, and not in the future. I was resigning. That was when her brain seemed to break. The words came faster and louder, tumbling over each other. "Please don't do this. Please don't do this. It's not what's best for him." And then, switching tracks, "You don't understand. You don't understand. It's going to be easier. I'm fixing it. Everything will be done for you, please." My father was not in the room. He almost never was, for the hard things. The house itself was the silent witness. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere, a clock I couldn't see marked off the seconds. 60 pages of my brother's life sat between us on the table, and neither of us touched them. I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence sit. I straightened the edge of a stack of papers I had no intention of reading. I turned my coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. 3 seconds. 4. She watched me do it, holding her breath. And then I said the true thing, the one the whole family had spent decades not saying, and I said it plainly, because the power of it was in how ordinary the words were and how long they'd been forbidden. "I have never wanted this. Not once." I was 18 years old, and I said yes, because saying no was not something that was allowed in this family. I have signed 12 reports, and I have never read one, because I cannot do what they say I'm doing. I am not your replacement, Mom. I was never going to become you. And I think you've known that for a long time and needed me not to say it. For 1 second, the mask slipped. It didn't slip the way it does in movies, into a tender confession. It came out sideways, bitter, as a defense. You think I had a choice? You think anyone was ever coming to save times me? Nobody pulled a chair back for me, Claire. Nobody. I turned out fine. And then she heard herself, and her eyes went wide with something like panic, and she reached for the papers on the table and squared them against the wood and said, "Fast. That's enough. That's enough now. I have a plan. Just wait, you'll see it gets easier." She never meant to hand me that. But she had, and I caught it midair. There had never been any room for her either. She had been a girl in a house that spent all its worry on someone else, too, and no one had come, and she had survived it by becoming the one who does everything, and then she had built me to be the next set of hands, because that was the only way she knew for a child to be worth keeping. It didn't excuse the sentence sitting in that care plan, but I finally understood the trauma bond that had held the two of us in place for 38 years. Not love, exactly. A shared idea that some people exist to be used up, and that the using up is what love means. "What about what's best for me?" I said. "I am telling you what I can do. That doesn't mean I don't love him. I'm still his sister. But I cannot hold legal authority over another person's entire life. He will need a public guardian in my place. The state has them for exactly this. There are 50 public guardians in the whole state. They won't take care of him." And then, quieter, meaner, aiming for the soft place, she called me by the nickname from middle school, the one I have hated since I was 12, the one that means times the little one, the easy one, the one who doesn't count. 38 years old, and she still could not see the woman in front of her. She had never once seen her. "I've made myself clear," I said, and I stood up. I know you're very upset. This isn't productive anymore, and my decision is not changing. I'm filing the paperwork today. I have to go now. Taking your name off is expensive. You'll have to go to court. That was the last thing I heard as I walked out the door. Let me stop the story right here for a moment. I need the room to go quiet for this one. Your parents never loved depending on you. They loved that your hunger to be seen, to finally be enough, was the thing that made you useful. And the moment your usefulness runs out, the second you stop being the plan, their warmth runs out with it, like a tap being shut off. I didn't read that in a book. I watched it happen in real time to me. It took my mother less than a week to prove it. I filed the resignation paperwork that afternoon. I stood at a counter in a county building with fluorescent lights and a pen chained to a little stand. And I signed one last document about my brother, the only one. In 12 years, I read every word of first. And walking back out into the parking lot, into an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with the sun on the asphalt, I felt something I had genuinely never felt before in my entire life. Not happiness, exactly. Lighter than that. The particular weightlessness of setting down a thing you've carried so long you'd stopped feeling your own arms. It has been over a week now. My mother hasn't called. Not one word since I stood up from that table. The silence has a taste to it, bitter. And I'd be lying if I told you it doesn't reach me at night. It turns out my mother's love came with a condition I'd felt my whole life, but never let myself name, until now, the condition of my usefulness. When I stopped being the plan, I stopped being someone she needed to speak to. Conditional love is a quiet thing. You can live your whole childhood inside it and mistake it for the only kind there is. But I want to tell you where I went yesterday, because that's the part that matters. I drove to Danny's group home with a small birthday cake on the passenger seat. When I got there, they weren't ready for me, so I waited in the hallway, and through the door, I could see him in the common room, behind a thick pane of safety glass, the soundproof kind, the kind I have been standing behind my whole life. I put my hand flat against it. It was freezing cold, the way that glass always is. And Danny turned his head, and he saw me. He doesn't know what the word guardian means. He will never understand what I signed or unsigned, or how much a lawyer costs, or what a support broker is. He looked through that glass and he did not see a figurehead or a backup plan or 12 years of reports. He saw his sister, and he saw a cake, and his face broke open into that crooked, lopsided smile I have loved my entire life. And he clapped his hands together, fast, the way he does when the feeling is too big for the loop of words. I stood in that hallway with my palm on the cold glass, and I cried. But for the first time I can remember, they were not the silent kind. They were tears of relief. Because here is the thing I finally understand. The thing it took me 38 years and one 7-year-old and a throbbing tooth to learn. Taking off the title of guardian was never abandoning him. It was the opposite. Between my brother and me, there are no more 60-page reports now. No more cold signatures. No more machine. When the glass of legal obligation finally shattered, what was left standing there in the hallway was the only thing I ever actually wanted to be to him. Not his guardian. Not his manager. Not my mother's understudy. Just his sister. I get to just be his sister now. I won't pretend it's clean. Childhood trauma recovery is not a door you walk through once. It's a thing you practice badly on ordinary afternoons. I finally went to the dentist, a small, stupid, enormous thing. I have started sitting on the floor with my 4 kids instead of watching them from the doorway, on the far side of the glass, the way I watched everything. I'm looking for a therapist, which I'm told is a strength and not a failure, though the child in me still flinches at needing anything at all. And when Nora asks me for something now, a toy, a story, my attention, I try to give it to her fast and full, with no lesson attached, so that she never once has to learn to want less to be loved. I want to be careful about what I'm telling you, because this is the line that separates the truth from a fairy tale. I have not stopped loving my mother, and I have not fixed her, and those are two different griefs. I can forgive her. I understand now exactly what made her, and I feel it, the whole aching weight of her life. And I am still not going back. Setting boundaries with family was never the cold wall I was raised to believe it would be the thing that would make me the villain. It turned out to be the first full breath I've taken since I was 7 years old. I don't know yet whether the silence between us becomes permanent, whether this quietly turns into going no contact, or whether she finds her way back to me as a person and not a plan. That part isn't mine to control. What's mine is that I stopped drowning to keep someone else afloat. This morning I opened the blinds in my kitchen, and the light came in and landed on the floor where my kids had left a mess of cereal bowls, and I didn't reach for my phone to check for a crisis, because there wasn't going to be one waiting for me. There was just the morning. My morning. The first ordinary day in my whole life that belonged to me. So if you're listening to this in the dark, on the far side of your own glass, I think we're both finally walking out of that house now. Toward the window? Yes. But this time, all the way through it. Into the light on the other side. If this felt less like a story and more like a memory, I want to stop and say something to you, plainly, the way no one said it to me. You were not too much. You were not the easy one because you needed nothing. You were the easy one because you learned, too young, that needing things was dangerous, and you made yourself small, so there would be enough for someone else's emergency. That wasn't a flaw in you. That was a child doing the most loving, most impossible thing a child can do. It was real, and it was not your fault, and the fact that someone in your house was hurting more does not erase that you were hurting at all. So let me hand you a few things, gently. Go to the doctor. Go to the dentist. Do the small, stupid, enormous thing you keep putting last. Sit on the floor with the people who chose you. Put your hands in some dirt, or walk until the fear loosens in your chest, or write the letter you'll never send. And please hear this without shame. Reaching for a therapist or a trauma professional is not weakness. It's one of the strongest things a survivor ever does. Healing is slow, and you're allowed to be slow. And if part of your story means stepping out of a role you cannot carry, setting a boundary, or even walking away entirely, that is a valid, sometimes necessary, sometimes life-saving choice, and it is yours to make for your own situation. No one on the internet, including me, can tell you whether to stay or go. But you are allowed to choose your own life. Loving someone has never once required you to disappear. And one more thing, turn outward for a second. There are children right now who are the quiet one, the good one, the one who never asks for anything, the too easy kid at the full table. Watch for them. The suddenly silent child. The stomachache before school with no cause. The one who stopped playing. Don't tell yourself it's not your place. One adult who actually sees times a child can change the entire life that child grows into, so that they won't have to carry it through their childhood and their whole adult life the way so many of us did. Where were you the first time you were sent behind the glass? Tell me. I read everyone. And if you've ever been the standby, subscribe and stay with me. I'll keep telling the ones no one in your family ever would. Pull up a chair. There's room here, and this time it's yours. But walking out of the glass house doesn't end the war. It only changes the battlefield. The moment you set that boundary, you come face to face with the most frightening weapon a toxic family owns: the enabler's silence. If you're drowning in the cold silence of a mother or a father right now, you need to understand the exact game being played to pull you back in. Tap the video on your screen now and I'll show you the real anatomy of the enabler's silence and how to break it once and for all.